Good morning and welcome to the Celtic Way Morning Briefing Live. I'm Tony Haggerty and I'm joined by Alison McConnell and Sean Martin. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
First and foremost, I have to say, if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit the subscribe button and you'll get alerts to all the videos whenever we go live and we post something up. There's all sorts of stuff on there. So we'll go straight into it, guys. And obviously, International Week, things kind of slow down a wee bit. But a wee bit of positive news from Celtic emerging in the past few hours that Greg Taylor could be awarded with a new deal. They're saying that an additional 2 to 3 years onto his contract, as well as a pay rise. Alison, Greg Taylor's a player that divides opinion amongst the Celtic supporters, but do you see that as a good piece of business and a good move by the club?
I think he certainly has something to offer. I think you've maybe noticed that in recent weeks when he hasn't been available through injury. I think he's a reliable custodian of the position. I think there are elements of his game that I think invite criticism and scrutiny, but I think overall he is a fairly robust squad player at Celtic. I think at times he's been an easy target for criticism. I think he's improved since coming to the club. I think some of his forward runs are good. I think there's maybe still question marks over defensive attributes, but I think he certainly has something to offer.
Sean, do you concur with that?
What I would say is I think maybe the problem a lot of people have got is that they think his level is that he should be a squad player, but he's actually the first choice, and I think he's the undisputed first choice so far. As you said, he divides the opinions. We've seen it in the comments already there. I can see a few. But in my opinion, I think he's been pretty good for Celtic overall. I think, could Celtic do better at left back? Probably. But I think from what they've got in the squad just now, it's difficult to envision better coming from any of those players. And I think it's unlikely that another left back will be recruited unless at least another one departs. So on the whole, I think he's pretty good. I think he's decent. I think Alison's phrase of a squad player has merit, but I think right now probably some of the criticism is that he isn't a squad player, he's a first choice. And I think saying that Celtic could do better to me isn't saying that Taylor's poor by any means. I think you can think that he is decent and think that Celtic can do better at the same time. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think Alison referenced a couple of facets to his game there. There's no point beating about the bush. I think he's got his drawbacks. I think he's got a lot of energy and stamina. He's not slow, but he's not exactly got game-changing pace, which I think frustrates people because he kind of beats a man, if you want to call it, beating a man by under or overlapping runs rather than 1v1. And I think that stands in stark contrast to the likes of Kieran Tierney, who previously occupied the position. And I think defensively, as Alison referenced as well, he's not particularly good in the air. And combined with the fact that he's not got that game-changing pace, that kind of area of the pitch can be targeted. And I think it has been a few times this season. So I think there's definite drawbacks. I think the criticism probably comes with the fact that he is first choice rather than a squad level player just now, but I think overall he's been pretty good.
As you say, Sean, there's a few comments coming in. Here's one from Intran. It clearly shows your level of aspiration. Alison, is that a fair comment about Greg Taylor?
I think that's harsh. I would have to say. I think a left back could be added to the squad, maybe not in the January window, but possibly in the summer. And I think it's sensible to try and protect what you have at the minute. I think Celtic don't have a huge amount of depth within the squad. I think you've seen it in recent weeks when there's been so many players out injured. So I think it makes sense to have them tied up in longer term contracts and have their availability there.
Sean, do you agree with that comment that came up there by In Transit about levels of aspiration?
Well, I think it ties into what I said there about his overall ability. Ideally, would you have a better left back? Probably, but I don't think they have on the books. So until such time as a better left back than Taylor comes in, he will be the first choice, and I think he deserves to be. I think it strikes me as the kind of player that he does know he's got some limitations, but he will go out there and try his best to carry out what Ange Postecoglou's asked him to do. And I think you've seen progress in that respect, that he actually adapted a wee bit better to the inverted fullback responsibilities than I thought he would. To be honest, I thought his best game would be constantly up and down overlapping. I didn't think he would be quite as comfortable coming inside and picking up the ball more. he could still improve on that. Obviously, he could, but I think he's been a wee bit better than expected at that as well.
Now that brings us on to the wider question then, Alison and Sean, about, it's coming up to January, and where do we think the areas that Celtic will strengthen? I'll throw this one at you, Alison. I see you smiling and thinking, "Oh, no, don't come to me," But we like your opinion, Alison. So you're going to have to give us it.
There are two facets to this question, aren't there? There are what's the realistic return that we'll be discussing at the end of January, and here is a blank canvas, and if you were to walk in and do what you want, what would you bring? Now, I think what you've seen in recent weeks is a real lack of creativity within the middle of the park. I think Ryan Christie has been badly missed since he's gone. I think someone to play that number 10 position. I think a creative midfielder for me would definitely be up there. I think another fullback. I think another striker. There's an argument for another striker too. I think you could go on. You could go through the whole squad. I think the likelihood is, I think you might get one or two in January. And I know it's been spoken about this morning about Ange Postecoglou going back to Japan, a market that he clearly knows well, and looking at players that he has a knowledge already of and has seen them in their own working environment that he may bring in. He may be encouraged in that aspect by how quickly Kyogo settled not just into the club and the culture around the city, but also into the team so quickly. So it may pave the way for other avenues. I don't know how much of that comes down to putting 2 and 2 together and drawing 5. And it also calls into question just who has responsibility for the identification of talent and who sources it and who makes decisions, because I think we know there's a far bigger picture there at most clubs other than just a manager.
Sean, Alison makes a good point there about the Japanese market. He told the Sunday papers that it is a market that he's looking to go back into and strengthen the Celtic side, and they've already begun discussions with support or identified targets, and they're hoping to get them in quicker than they did in the previous transfer window. So that shows you the way the manager's thinking. He is trying to get something rolling, and a name that's cropped up is Maeda from Yokohama Marinas. Now, we're not saying that it's just, it is the international week, so these things are going to happen. Names are going to get flung at you, But do you see him going back to Japan and maybe bringing in one or two, as Alan said, maybe a striker, Maeda's a striker, an attacking midfielder, number 10, that kind of idea?
I think there's nothing surer, because he's mentioned it more than once now. And you referenced what he told the Sunday papers. That was the kind of jumping off point for an article I've got on the site today, looking at basically what you say there, where will they actually look to strengthen, where will they actually do it, rather than where should they, because as Alison pointed out, there's still several areas that you would hope that they would strengthen, but realistically, I've looked at 4 and kind of gave my verdict on whether I think they'll actually strengthen based on who's already there. But what he says to the Sunday papers, I think there's plenty of insinuations in it as well, which also ties into what Alison says about who's responsible for these transfers and who's ultimately the guy that it comes down to get them done. Because he made a couple of comments about how slow things moved in the last window, and that they've started earlier this time. The insinuation obviously be that they weren't the last time, which I think everybody kind of was presuming. But I think, to answer your question, I think he will go to Japan. I think that's why he keeps mentioning it. And I think it's only natural. That's a market he knows well. The outstanding signing that he's made so far has been from that market. I think the link that you're talking about, Maeda, it's from his old team. He signed him, he knows him. And I think that has its own benefits. He knew Kyogo, I think, if I'm right, because he scored a hat-trick against him, never lost against him, I think, when he played against him over in Japan. But the Maeda link, it's one of those ones, if he does manage to sign him, he's getting someone who understands and crucially can implement what he wants from his players, which he also referenced in that Sunday Papers interview, where he was saying that we'll get people in who are used to or who can play the style of football we want to play. Again, the insinuation being that there's plenty of players there that either don't or can't. I had a wee look at Maida for you when you says we might be mentioning him here. I know it's still a tenuous link, but I had a wee look anyway. In case any of you listening don't really know much about him, he's 23, so still decent age-wise. He used to play for Maritimo in Portugal before Ange took him to Yokohama F Marinos. What I would say is that there's a lot of Japanese league players out of contract at the end of January coming, but he's, as far as I can see, he's not out of contract until 2024, so it would take a fee to get him. He's been likened to Kyogo, can play left wing and up front, but when I looked at his stats, as I want to do, I looked at his stats and he actually, when it comes to like top level football, either Portugal or Japan, he's only really played the equivalent of about 16 matches as a striker. He tends to play wide left more, so he doesn't often start as a striker. But in those, like the minutes that equate to about 16 matches, he scored 11 goals. So like it's still a decent and quite impressive record.
Now, Alison, if we're going on the fact that you're talking about who identified these players, for a fact, Ange identified Kyogo. So we've spoken about this before. It would, the board would be perfectly entitled to say, okay, anymore where they came from, and trust Ange's judgment on that, and maybe say to him, if he can recruit a couple, then go and, as we say, we're not saying Maida is one of them, but it's a rumour that has started already, and it would certainly fit what Celtic need as well at this moment in time.
Well, as I said, I think the success of Kyogo has shown that you don't have to qualify in terms of creating time for players to settle. I think he's shown that he could come straight in and be impactful from the off. I think we saw that right away, and I don't know how much that comes down to personality and individuality, and not sure it would be the same for every player that's coming, but I think it would certainly augur well in terms of going back into that market that you've already got one success story to boast from it. The other aspect, I think, too, is that Celtic are in a financial position when it comes to January to strengthen the squad and to go out and trying to bring players in who are first team ready, players who come in. And I think that's important on so many fronts. I think for the latter half of the campaign, it can be so important. I think it's why you need to make sure you're staying pace with everything that's going on just now in terms of the table. You can't afford to lose further ground. And I think if things are neck and neck, that you have the ability to go out and add to your squad and strengthen your hand for the second half of the campaign. But also too, I think January can be so important in terms of the preparatory work that's done for the summer and for European games. Now we know that this season the likelihood is going to be that the winners of the league go straight into the Champions League group stages, don't have the qualifying run, which is huge, absolutely huge. But I think at the very, very least, you need to have a backup plan that if you do fail, not that anyone would be planning on it, but if you do miss out in the league, that you're in a position, one, to have a settled squad going into next season, and two, that you're prepared for qualifiers that come so early on in terms of the season.
Now, Sean, January is always important in terms of possible players coming in, but I mean, there's always the argument that there has to be players going out, and we talk about the likes of Barkas, maybe Bolly, even possibly a Jetty if Celtic do bring in another striker. Do you see the likes of them being jettisoned in January, or do you see them staying until the end of the campaign?
Well, I think I mentioned in this article that I'm plugging again on the website today that there's 32 first team squad members listed on the club's website, but realistically, and this has been talked about, I've done a squad depth chart and everything before the transfer window shut. Realistically, a heap of those aren't really going to be contributing, and whether it's loan moves for the younger guys and the recent signings that haven't really, made the grade yet, or if it's permanent moves for like the so-called unfancied ones, some of the ones you mentioned there, Barkas, maybe presumably ball and goalie, despite his cameo against Livingston, then you'd assume a few at least will be going out the door. But I think the key question is how far that frees up space for actual first-team quality replacements to come in, because that is ultimately what Celtic need to come in January. They don't need any more fillers. They need direct contributors.
Now, I want to also share something, and the Celtic supporters will be like, shock horror, but a wee rumour has also emerged about Southampton being interested in Kyogo. And in the words of the old song, hands off, he's mine. For all of you who can remember that of vintage Celtic Dar reference here. But I think the Celtic supporters would be aghast at any kind of contemplation that Kyogo would be going anywhere, Alison. But
I think his manager might be equally aghast. Listen, I don't think there's a huge surprise. I think prepare yourself for stories like this. I think if you have a player who is hitting the headlines for his performances, for his goals, for what he brings to the team, there will be interest. I think it's inevitable. He will be scouted by other teams. This is just what happens, and it's complementary to the player. It's complementary to the club that they've identified him. There is not a chance that Celtic will encounter interest in someone who has been so quickly has become quite talismanic for them in such a short space of time.
No, I agree with that, Tony. I agree with that. I think you've got to remember he is Ange's man. He is one of the ones that he identified. But more than anything else, even if it is true and they are interested in him, he's got a contract until 2025, so it would need to be a good offer to even entertain it.
I mean, Alison hit the nail on the head there. I don't think I've watched or viewed a player who has come in from outside the country and be so talismanic in the shortest space of time. No, Henrik Larsson was talismanic for all the wrong reasons after one game.
You know
what I mean? But this guy, I mean, everybody loves him. I mean, in the way he plays football, a smile on his face, and just everything he does. I mean, there was that wonderful picture with Joe Hart, had him in a bear hug on Sunday, and you know, it's just it's infectious, isn't it? He's really put a smile on every Celtic supporter's face, and the manager and the players. Obviously, he seems to be well liked.
I think I think he changed the tone. I think you can't underestimate what he done when he came in. I think that first appearance when he played at Tynecastle, kind of disappointing night when he kicked the season off, and he just pretty much came off the plane and walked into the dugout. He was barely in the country. But I think he seems to be that his personality is just as important as what he's brought on the pitch. Now, first and foremost, you're judged on what you contribute in terms of goals, assists, movement. But I think immediately what you could see is that he is an intelligent player. He has bags of ability, and he lifted things at Celtic. You got to remember when he had first come in, and there remained the same kind of discourse and discontent on the back of last season, losing the Champions League qualifier to Midtjylland, losing the opening league game to Hearts. I just think all of a sudden there was a player came in that looked as though he had something genuine to offer, someone that came in with enthusiasm and ability. I think everything about him has endeared him to the club. I think walking around, being subbed off last week and walking around and collecting the rubbish from the side of the pitch as he's going off. When do you ever see it? I think his support when he was out injured, and he's clearly cheering on his teammates and he's offering support. He's not sitting detached from everyone that you often see when players are injured, that they seem out of things. I think he just seems so integral to what the manager is trying to bring to the club.
Enthusiasm and ability, Sean, not two qualities that have been levelled at myself, but Alison hit the nail on the head there. I think about Kyogo, it's just he's everything about him. You know, it's just a joy to watch. And even as Alison said, they're picking up the rubbish. I mean, you've never seen anything like that in a footballer at all.
No, totally. I think the word that you used there, infectious, is one that I've used a couple of times to describe him as well, and also the one Alison used, tone setting. I think both of these are spot on. I think his attitude on the pitch and his attitude off it, from what we've seen, both of them bode totally in the positive manner. And as I said, he's obviously someone that Ange really, really fancied to take with him. Fancied him for the style of play, but he's clearly got the personality for it as well, and that's sometimes just as important.
Well, this has been the Celtic way, and the message to Southampton is hands off. The sign says don't walk. Thanks very much for your contribution, Alison and Sean. And remember, guys, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and you'll get notification of every time we go live with videos and all sorts on the Celtic Way. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Tony.
Thank you.